Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this ecoDa's webinar on ESG, from awareness to strategic moves. I am Sandra Robert, the Executive Director of Ruberna, and I'm also ecoDa's board member. As the chairwoman of the ESG task force of ecoDa, I am very happy to welcome you today in large numbers on this very cold but sunny morning. At ecoDa, we strongly believe that the best way to move forward on ESG topics is to exchange ideas with each other and to create a dynamic of excellence. It is today the duty of successful companies, we think, in this area to take the floor and to lead the way for other companies. So peer exchange and education are key to make sure that companies are not lost in transition. So the purpose of this event is double, not only to raise awareness on the importance of ESG matters for the board, for the directors, but also to collect and share good practices. Of course, ESG is not the only reason for existing of companies, and the question is, how do they align all these different roles, and how do they identify what is material for them to adapt and to go for a new, more sustainable business strategy? We will learn a lot of that today, but before giving the floor to our first speaker, I want to inform everyone that this webinar is being recorded. As a participant, you will be in silent mode, but you are of course most welcome to put a question or a comment to our speakers. Each moderator of our panels, we will have 3 panels, will pick questions during his or her panel. But let us first now set the scene with you, Roger Wezenbeek, and start with some regulation perspective. Can you tell us something more about what the DG FISMA is cooking regarding the revision of the non-financial reporting directive? Please, Mr. Roger Wezenbeek. Roger Wezenbeek, can I ask you to take the floor, please? Welcome.
Okay, I suppose you can see me. Thanks for
we can see you.
Very good. You can hear me as well. Thanks for inviting me to this webinar. It was a few months ago, I believe, that you did ask to somebody from FISMA to say a few words of introduction. I thought it would be a small thing, and my screen is very small. A few people, so I think there are more than 400 people on the call. So I'm a bit flattered, and I'm a bit scared as well by having so many people watching. But I've pretended that it will just be you and me. I say a few words. Very good. But of course, there's a massive interest in our area, what we're doing. In the title, you said that I would talk also about a taxonomy, which is not really my area of expertise, and I have other colleagues working on this, and so I don't want to say too much about what is cooking. I know only that we did have a public consultation for a delegated act, a draft delegated act on climate change adaptation and climate change mitigation, and I believe that there were almost 27,000 replies. So I guess my colleagues are still reading them, all the replies. Although I must say there were about 25,000 from a campaign, Stop Fake Green EU campaign. So there is a lot of lobbying, but it does show the massive interest for the sustainable finance agenda. And of course, what is cooking is a lot. And I know that my commissioner is very conscious of all the activities we have been undertaking, an enormous amount of initiatives, and we bring to the market, if you like. So I think she's very conscious of all the laps and the overlaps and underlaps. I don't know, but I think she's very conscious of try to get a sort of proportionate approach. But let me talk a bit about what I know a bit more about, which is the non-financial reporting directive and the revision thereof, which always feels a bit strange to talk about that, because of course, as you all know, it doesn't exist, the non-financial reporting directive, because it ceased to exist the moment it came into force and when it amended the accounting directive. So what we are looking at is basically amending the accounting directive. And of course, we all know when we talk about the non-financial reporting directive, what we mean. We mean the articles, especially Article 90A in the accounting directive, which basically was the start of what we call the non-financial statement. What companies need to report about environment, social, employment, employee issues, human resource, human rights, anti-bribery, anti-corruption, what kind of business concepts you have to report about, which was in 2014 was the first, I think, one of the innovative directives in this field, which laid the grounds. Now, 6-7 years down the line, we see that a lot of problems with that directive, in a sense, with reporting in general, because companies often don't know what to report, and that they do report a lot. Let's face it. I think a lot of companies, they use all kinds of frameworks and standards, and they do a fantastic job. But all in all, there's a lot of confusion also among companies. What do we need to report? And investors and other stakeholders, we're not just doing this for investors. They wonder, how can we compare notes? How can we compare the information? And often the information not there. And so there's a lot of ambiguity, if you like, about what needs to be reported, what is reported. And there are still more and more initiatives coming on the market, if you like, not just in Europe, worldwide, for what to report. But I think what you can expect from the Commission proposal, which was announced to come out in March, I don't know where we go to make it, but we'll come to that, is first of all, and I think that will be the centerpiece of our initiative, a kind of a requirement for companies to report according to EU sustainability standards. When I say EU standards, I don't necessarily mean that this is EU against global. I mean, there are also a lot of global initiatives, most recently from the IFRS Foundation, who are thinking about creating a sustainability board, sustainability standards globally. You have to see how that will develop. But I think what we have in mind, and the next speaker will be able to say much more about this, but what we have in mind is that we should have EU standards to make it clear for companies and investors and other stakeholders what needs to be reported on and what is reported. And those standards should meet the ambitions we have in Europe about the climate deal and about the Green Deal. And it's not just about climate, it goes much beyond. It's the environmental, it's the social, it's the governance aspects. So it will be, I think we want to set in Europe the bar very high. We want to have a high ambition commensurate to our Green Deal ambition. So, and of course, in a way, we want to take the lead. I mean, in the sense that we are a bit afraid that certain international initiatives, how welcome they are, and may not be as ambitious as we are in Europe. I mean, if I take the IFRS, for example, this is very much focused on climate first and very much focused on investor value. We think we have passed this phase in Europe and we want to be ambitious and we want, if need be, to take the lead and we want to go forward. So I think the requirement for companies to report according to standards, that will be, I think, the biggest change when we talk about the revision of the NRD. Who should set the standards? I mean, the next speaker will talk about more about the tremendous work the task force is doing right now. And I've had the privilege of seeing some draft reports already. It's really a massive task what Patrick and his people are doing to try to identify on what should be reported, how to report. A lot of, I mean, I let him talk, do the talking. He's much better qualified than I am. I think EFRAG has shown to be able, at least will be able to show, to deliver a fantastic report and has shown to be in a very inclusive manner. And of course, a decision to make is whether EFRAG should in the future become the European standard setter, if you like. There is also a report coming from Mr. Jean-Paul Gauzès about the governance structure, because now it's very much about endorsement of financial standards. This is also a very important element, because EFRAG, as it is today, cannot assume the job. Of course, there are many other players in the field, so we have to see how that works out with the governments, about the European supervisory authorities like ESMA, what role they would have in that process. So there we are in the middle of it. I don't know whether it would all filter down in the revision of the NFRD, because again, as I said, it's basically changing the accounting directive. What you can expect, it will be very short. What you expect certainly is, I think, basically the areas on which there should be reporting. I think what you can expect, a reconfirmation of the double materiality perspective, which is very important. Probably where we think the sustainability reporting should find its place. I think we will be able to speak about sustainability reporting as opposed to non-financial reporting. We will talk about the role of assurance, whether the level of assurance, limited versus reasonable, the role of possibly of auditors. We think there may be some changes needed for the transparency directive. So there will be other directives involved. So, but all in all, it's very interesting. What we try to do is to, well, we work very hard, but we're still waiting for the task force report, which will to some extent filter down in what we are going to propose as commission. So it will all take a bit more time. Again, the working hypothesis in the team is to have a draft ready in March. But whether the commission will adopt already by then, I think that will be a bit too optimistic. But we hope that it will not delay very much. And of course, there's another initiative we will talk later about what's happening in the field of justice. That, of course, is very relevant, and the sustainability, the due diligence, and the sustainability. Sorry, I'm talking too quick. Sustainability reporting, of course, is also very important. That's complementary, if you like. But we think, as it stands now, that we will go forward as quickly as possible with the proposal for the revision of the NFRD. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger. It's very interesting, and I hope that you will stay for some time during this webinar to hear what companies are doing already, and to listen to their concerns about also about too much regulation. But you already did the introduction of Patrick de Cambourg indirectly. Patrick shares it's a mouthful, the project task force on preparatory work for the elaboration of possible EU non-financial reporting standards established by EFRAG. Patrick, welcome. Do you have any news to share with us, and will the European Union indeed position itself as a normative leader on ESG subject, as already explained by Roger Wezenbeek?
Good morning to all. Thank you, Sandra, for this introduction. In the interest of time, I would like to summarize what I have to say with 7 quick points. The first one is, and maybe it's not in my capacity of chair of the task force that I would share the message, but in my previous capacity of senior partner of an audit and consulting firm, which had the opportunity, and I had the opportunity to have many contacts with directors, as you may imagine. You know, the key message that I would like to share, which is my current observation, is that sustainability reporting is about to become as important as financial reporting. That's the image which I would like to share with you, is the image of corporate reporting walking on 2 legs, financial reporting and sustainability reporting, on an equal footing. And by the way, when you want to walk, you better have 2 legs of equal size and strength. So that's the first message. And so it is an investment for board members, for me, and because it's going to become crucial. It has become for some, for many, but it's gaining in terms of overall importance and relevance. The second message, which was illustrated by Roger, is that you know, the legislative level is not sufficient. So the revised NFRD will be, of course, a game-changing text, and it will be tabled next month for consideration by the commissioners. I've heard in April, and adoption by the commissioners, and then it will follow the legislative process. But from day one, when it was announced that the revision would take place, it was announced also that as for financial reporting, there was a crucial need for a robust set of sustainability reporting standards, because without the pragmatic approach and detailed approach of standards, even in an environment which is principle-based, you know, the information is not satisfactory. That is the current experience. The NFRD was a very, very first interesting and symbolic step, but you know, you only have guidelines to implement it, and the guidelines are not sufficient to create comparability on the market. So a robust set of standards is absolutely key. The third message is, of course, that you know, we at task force level, with its 35 members and 9 representatives from public EU institutions, we have conducted a huge amount of work, as it has been mentioned, this is preparatory work. So we are not proposing standards yet. It's pre-standard setting. It's preparatory, and the report is due next week. So I will send to the commissioner the report, hopefully on Friday the 19th. And that process encompassed not only hard work from the task force members and the support staff, but also 7 outreach events. And we had more than 4,000 registrants in the EU just to demonstrate the level of interest, with a turnout rate of 75%, which is huge. And we conducted that as a European roadshow. We visited all, virtually of course, but we visited all jurisdictions. The fourth point, which is going to substance, the next points are in substance. So the fourth point is that one of our first takeaway, which will be illustrated in part 1 of our report, is that there is a very unique legal and political EU landscape, which provides you know, strong foundations for standard setting. In other words, you know, the legal system, the political ambition, the momentum that exists today in the EU is creating a real you know, impetus on sustainability reporting. And of course, it has to be proportionate. It has to also, you know, take into account the challenges for implementation, but it's also a major opportunity for EU businesses, because, you know, the pressure from the external world is huge. And we all see statements from many international players saying that, so the key advantage in the EU is that it will be mandatory and comparable. So, you know, when you think about that, it compares very, very positively with systems which are voluntary, you know, and less comparable, because it's a pick and choose, and you can take one reference or the other, and then you can compare businesses. You can't compare businesses. The fifth point is that I'm sorry to be a little technical here, but you know, there are important concepts that have to be taken care of, and that have to be translated into standards and into practice. And you know, it might be surprising, but what we call at standard setting level conceptual frameworks are key. So the legislative level is establishing a number of concepts, and we have been working. This will be part 2 of our report. We are trying to operationalize that through guidelines, i.e., what are the key elements that will be distinct, which will be distinctive for the standard setting in the EU. And Roger alluded to one, which is double materiality, which is very, very important, because a strong trend outside the EU would be to give as a primary objective the financial materiality, which is called the outside-in impact. What are the risks for the financial value creation of a business? In the EU, there is the other side of the coin, which is as important, which is the inside-out impact. What are the impacts of the businesses on the environment and people? And that is key. So the standard setting in the EU should address these two dimensions, which are key. My sixth message is that in part 3 of our report, we design a target architecture of standards, which is pretty ambitious and comprehensive. But okay, so that could frighten everybody, but that's not the point. The point is that you know, when you start a journey, you want a vision of the destination, and then you plan for the journey in time-wise. So the ambitious target architecture is a key element of the, if I may say so, of the identity of the EU in terms of, you know, the definition of the role of businesses in society. And seventh point, last but not least, you know, a target architecture is not a contradiction with a realistic roadmap. It is planning for the journey, and you know, that's where it becomes a little tricky, because at the same time you need to allow for a progressive implementation and a progressive enhancement of the content, and on the other hand, you want that the first time that you're going to implement the revised NFRD and the associated standards, you have at least a game-changing first step. So that's what we are trying, and you know, once I have finished this meeting, I will finalize the words on that part 4 on how to fine-tune, and also that was alluded to by Roger, how to cooperate internationally. You know, I think that the idea of endorsing something that would be in existence outside of the EU is not realistic, because there is no real model fully available. However, there are many good contributions and good input that can be considered. And on the other side, there is also the possibility to contribute to the global move, which seriously needs impetus. So, you know, the overall idea as a conclusion is to have an ambitious first set, but nevertheless realistic, and also to build on and contribute to the international momentum in terms of sustainability reporting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. It was a very clear summary, and so that's. Now I will turn to Marcial Campos Calvo Sotelo, who is the chair of the Professional Standards Committee at ICA, our Spanish Institute of Directors. Very welcome, Marcial. We have a question for you, hearing all this and preparing for this. This is, of course, very important for directors. We have heard it. It is a momentum. There is a tremendous change going on. So the question is, to what extent have the directors understood the importance of the change that is taking place? And how does your institute, the Spanish Institute, support them in their journey? Go ahead, Marcial.
Thank you very much. I hope, am I be seeing on the screen correctly, and can I be heard?
Okay. I see you, we see you, and we hear you.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. What I would like to do is to share with you some reflections precisely on the implications that the notions of sustainability, financial information, purpose have for powers of directors. And I think it fits very well with the title of this webinar, because in order to go from awareness to strategic moves, the role of the board is not just important. The leadership and the commitment of the board is an essential precondition to be able to do anything in any company. Therefore, what we have done in ICA, in ICA, is to prepare a document, which is available, by the way, digitally, dealing precisely with those terms. And let me try to quickly walk you through through the ideas we have in the document. Two comments by way of context. The first one is that obviously, and we have heard already enough from my two predecessors in this meeting, there are a series of new regulations, norms, recommendations dealing with the duties of companies regarding non-financial information, sustainability, etc. That's a reflection of a phenomenon, and I think that's what is important, which is deep and which is evolving very rapidly. And the phenomenon consists that society is demanding that companies take broader responsibilities than they traditionally had. And this broader set of responsibilities has all the concepts, share some common denominators, purpose, sustainability, ESG, corporate social responsibility. They all share the notion that first they have to take into consideration their impact on different groups, interest groups, stakeholders, in addition to shareholders, and they have to be accountable to them. Second dimension is that they have to report their performance and see their performance, not just in terms of the traditional financial and economic criteria, but incorporating new criteria, sometimes incidentally very difficult to quantify, like issues of health, diversity, environmental impact, corruption, etc. And the third element in the new dimensions of responsibilities that companies are required to do is the need to give a greater weight to the long-term considerations. In fact, for many, sustainability is precisely to make today's decisions without damaging the potential of the future. Now, all this, by the way, is affecting all kinds of companies. And incidentally, in my comments, I'm not addressing only the large, very large companies, which are very aware of that and have been acting on that for some time, but also medium family companies who are at a different stage of development, but that have exactly the same issues proposed to them. My second consideration is on the implications for the board, is that all this situation represents challenges, but it also provides opportunities. I'm not going to get into that, but there is plenty of evidence that in terms of value creating, and when I say value creating, is not only non-financially, but also financially, opportunities are being generated by this new attitude that affects the regulators, the investors, clients, employees, and public opinion in general. Therefore, what I want to stress is that boards are fundamentally responsible to respond to these challenges. The task of the board, the fundamental responsibilities of the board, in essence, do not change because there are new demands placed on the companies. What does change is the way they discharge those responsibilities. The board continues to be responsible, in essence, of providing leadership at the highest level for the companies, subject only to the General Assembly. That's basically what the board has to do. And inevitably, you know, what is happening has an impact on the way they carry those functions. They have a very large level of latitude in responding. Beyond complying with regulations, boards have to decide how far do they want to go in terms of commitments they want to make to sustainability and to ESG. And there is a tremendous amount of latitude on that. And when I say latitude, it's not just in expressing convictions, it is in the way they are willing to really carry them out. So boards have to make the decision, how far do you want to go and how you commit yourself. And then what we advise is that they take all their fundamental functions and, so to speak, address the way they are discharged in view of the commitments they are willing to make. And before I get into that, let me say there are three, if they want to move forward, there are three questions that they have to drive more or less in parallel at very, very different levels. The first one is that they have to drive a significant cultural change in the company that affects purpose, mission, strategies, and generally speaking, the functioning of the corporation. The second, if you want to be practical about it, is that they have to have a very good understanding of who are the relevant stakeholders. What are the interdependencies they have with the company and how material those interdependencies are. Having a map of relevant stakeholders is a key need for any company if they want to move forward on this. And the third element, which has been addressed very eloquently by my predecessors, is that if you want to be operational, you have to establish a set of metrics that allow you to analyze and evaluate decisions in the new context and to measure, or at least evaluate, how the company is doing regarding the new commitments. Now, when you look to the basic functions of the board, for the purpose of this, let me summarize them in 5 groups. The first one that has to be analyzed in view of the new commitments is the managing of the board itself. It's very obvious that the composition of the board and the organization of the board have to reflect the new commitments. You might need new skills. We are not suggesting, incidentally, that you create a board of specialists, but it is important that the board collectively has the capabilities and the requirements that are needed to move in this situation. Organization of the board is very obvious. Some companies establish a sustainability committee, some others add new responsibilities to existing committees, but it is true that the role of the chairman, the role of the lead director, the role of the secretary of the board, and the role of the board committees, generally speaking, change because they have to assume and carry forward commitments regarding ESG and regarding sustainability. The third element, which I think in the board, managing the board, which sometimes is overlooked, at least in my experience, and I have had a view, is the functioning of the board. What I mean is that if you decide that some things are important, they have to be reflected in the way the board spends its time. And that means that in the agenda of the meetings and in the content of the meetings, issues of sustainability have to appear explicitly. It is very interesting. I advise all of you, any of you, take the minutes of the board and look at them and see how much space is taken for, let's say, performance last month, forward-looking questions, or sustainability. You may see some divergences between what it is said and what it is done, okay? Finally, for the managing of the board, obviously, evaluation and compensation have to reflect the new commitments. Evaluation should be comprehensive, and if you have new objectives, obviously have to enter into it. Second group of responsibilities, non-delegable, by the way. What I mean, this type of responsibilities, the board can delegate the execution, but it cannot abdicate the responsibility for them. It's establishing the strategy. That's another huge area of responsibility for the board. When we talk strategy, obviously, if you integrate different commitments and criteria, the process and the substance of the strategy are affected by it. The board is ultimately responsible for approving it and for controlling the execution. And that means that going up to the highest level, the purpose, the mission, the fundamental policies of the corporation may have to be restated and revised. Those things, purpose, mission, values, they set the framework in which you make strategic decisions. Therefore, you have to think of them and whether you want to change them. Second, strategy becomes real when you make strategic decisions, okay? And that means that analyzing and evaluating decisions, alternative decisions, have to incorporate criteria that did not exist before. This is very complex because some of the new criteria are difficult to assess and are difficult or impossible to quantify. And putting the two together takes me to probably what I think is the most important message. Moving into this new era, boards have to be aware that they will have to manage conflicts between objectives. Real conflicts. The most obvious example is a company in a time of crisis trying to decide whether they cut employment to strengthen the company for the long term, or they preserve employment short term. It's not a joke, okay? There is nothing idyllic about these situations, but boards have to be aware that if you commit to something, making it real is going to create decision conflicts between objectives. One last comment about possible conflicts is deciding between confidentiality of strategy and transparency. The only answer I could give to that is that obviously the substance of a strategy should be confidential. You're not going to be there announcing how you're going to surprise competition beforehand so that they are ready for you, okay? But the process by which you reach your strategy could be made transparent. So much for a strategy, but obviously it's one of the fundamental areas where the new commitments have to have an impact. The third important set of responsibilities is responding to shareholders and third parties. we have already, being accountable to them is very clear. Just complying with the regulations forces you to present information, non-financial information. Now we heard it's more sustainability reporting, which I welcome the changing concept, by the way, because sustainability is a much more attractive way of expressing what we're talking about, I think, than simply non-financial information. But obviously boards have to integrate that. In addition to that, they might have some interest groups, some stakeholders that deserve or require a specific information for them. Like, for example, take a mining company which is operating in a certain community. Maybe the area in which they operate will require some special communication processes and policies dealing with the specific individuals and people who are there. Okay, I'm not going to extend myself too much on that because it's
Marshall, can I? I'm sorry to interrupt. It's very interesting, but can I ask you to wrap up in the last comments in some minutes, because we're going over our time, and I would not have the other speakers wait too long. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, I just simply state the only other two areas that I'm not going to deal with, but the board should revise, is supervising the day-to-day performance and viability of the company. And obviously, what I have said have a direct impact on them, non-financial risks among them, and the upgrading of compliance functions in general that have to be done. And of course, supervising and recruiting the key executives. Let me wrap up. The only thing we are saying in this report is that this new phenomenon with the increasing new demands about the companies represents a major challenge for the board, which is ultimately responsible for dealing with it. And nothing will happen if the board is not leading and committed to the new situation. Therefore, what they have to do is to take a serious, rigorous review of the way they discharge their functions and see what must and should be changed in view of these new demands. I apologize for the time, and thank you very much for your patience.
Do not apologize. It was very interesting. I'm sure that all the participants were very happy to hear you share the interesting insights of the Spanish Institute, and it's very practical insights that they can put to use in their board. So thank you for sharing this with us, Marshall. And we will also make sure that the participants will have the link to your report. Well, let us now turn to the first panel discussion that will be moderated by Natasha Martsekis. Hello and welcome again, Natasha. Driving Forces for Change. Natasha is Secretary General and founding member of the Net Club in Greece. She is also a non-executive board member of CEPAL Hellas Financial Services and a member of its audit committee. Natasha has an extensive experience in dealing with the fund management industry through a role as a head of institutional sales for Alpha Bank for 20 years already. Congratulations, Natasha, and I give you the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Natasha Martsekis here. Thank you, Sandra, for the very kind introduction. I would also like to thank all of you for taking the time today to watch this webinar organized kindly by ecoDa in order to discuss some of the main drivers for the ESG performance. More specifically, at the panel that I will be moderating shortly, we will be touching upon two very important issues. Firstly, we will discuss how, in our effort to assess ESG performance, we can combine the quantitative analysis of sustainability data with qualitative findings. And secondly, we will turn our attention to how asset managers are incorporating the ESG mantra into the products and the brand. But at this stage, let me introduce our distinguished panelists today by the order of presentation, who will be sharing their interesting views on our topics. First panelist is Mr. Kevin Giersch, who is the head of Northern European markets for Moody's ESG Solutions, the sustainability data provider. We also have the pleasure of having with us Markus Kramer from Hirschel & Kramer, who will explain to us how the RIBI index that his company has developed measures the asset manager's ability to translate commitment to sustainability and ESG into their financial products. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the opportunity to moderate this panel. We expect our presentations to last approximately 30 minutes, and then we will be taking questions from the audience. But before I pass the floor to Kevin, I would like to make some introductory remarks in order to facilitate further our discussion. So the beginning of this new decade, as you all know, finds the asset management in a very challenging landscape, where practically increasing environmental, social, political, and COVID-related issues pressure investors to adopt global sustainability initiatives and disclosure. Even in the market free fall of last spring, you all remember that investors kept hanging on to one asset class. That was sustainable investments. The pandemic showed very clearly to all market participants how some catastrophic events really can influence investment returns. So the pressure for sustainability and corporate accountability is further increased by the generational change, which dictates that the millennials give a lot of emphasis on ESG commitment when they consider their investments. And they want to know exactly what kind of asset allocation practices and engagement criteria are followed by the money managers. So this trend is really here to stay, and the ESG investment universe is exploding on the active management side, but also on the passive funds. According to data provided by the Financial Times actually yesterday, total assets in sustainable funds, they have hit a record 1.7 trillion in 2020. This is up a whopping 50% over the previous year. On the same tone, I want to add that hedge funds are also adopting a closer approach to sustainability activism, and we see them pushing companies to improve disclosure and the reporting standards. As many of you know, ESG issues were the most prominent topic on shareholder proposals for the last 2 years, with climate, of course, topping the list. As Kevin will explain during his presentation shortly, this shift in the paradigm of investing is creating a huge demand for ESG data by investors of all asset classes, who are witnessing also a very big growth in the services provided by the ESG agencies and other data providers. So the use of this sustainability data and metrics is not only common practice for the large asset managers, but we see it also being adopted by the smaller asset managers, who are now using extensively the services of data aggregators who offer a wide range of sustainability ratings, metrics, and data. However, there's a common theme here. All market participants agree that there's a big lack of standardization in the reported information. Many of these ESG ratings differ substantially in the methodologies, in the terminologies, and the reporting standards, and they can easily produce very different results, often confusing investors and companies who complain for lack of accuracy, comparability, reliability, and also the timeliness of the data provided. Investors often also seem to find problematic the fact that companies themselves control the data that they publish and also feed to the rating agencies. So it is important for the research providers to collect the soft data too. According to my view, this paves the way for a qualitative approach when it comes to assess the overall ESG performance. As you all know, qualitative data is often not publicly available and can be only obtained through the service provider's close interaction with media, regulators, social media, and other market participants. It has been already mentioned once today that, for example, corruption, money laundering practices, health and safety information can be very challenging when being reported. Imagine even being reported in a standardized way. An interesting approach is the one where companies do not simply report ESG data, which are aggregated by the providers, by the rating providers, but they also try to substantiate this data and support it with further internal documentation. So on a final note here, I would like to stress a point which we have been hearing a lot from investors and companies recently. In this new era of sustainability-related ratings, data, and research, there is a tremendous need from focus on materiality, especially when you take into consideration the huge number of indicators used, the complexity, the scope of the data provided, that sometimes can make investors feel overwhelmed and unable to comprehend the data that at the end really matters. So with these thoughts, I will now pass the floor to Kevin for his very interesting presentation on how to approach qualitative and quantitative data when assessing ESG performance. So Kevin, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for this introduction, Natasha, and I just wanted to thank you also, ecoDa's, for organizing this great event. Well, just a kind of quick background regarding what I've done over the last 17 years. I've been lucky enough to start my career on ESG 17 years back. I've audited companies on ESG performance for 10 years. I've lived in India, I've worked in the Middle East, in Ireland, and I've worked in different projects in more than 20 countries. And obviously, over the last 2-3 years, and I agree, and I'm echoing back to what Patrick de Cambour mentioned already earlier, there is a momentum right now. There has been a shift over the last 2-3 years, especially after the COP21. You can see that there is a very, very important and growing interest, both from investors and from corporates as well. I think this is important to mention that there is a win-win situation at stake. And you're right, Natasha, there is a growing demand. You mentioned this articles recently. When I started my career in 2003, the total assets with ESG criteria was representing only 1.5 to 2% total assets under management, globally speaking. Today, well, depending on data, it's definitely much bigger. In Europe, we used to say that 50% of all assets under management have ESG criteria when investors decide to invest in corporates. So you can see that it's not a niche market, it's a huge trend, and there is a growing demand for both investors and corporates to move forward. There is a growing demand in terms of asset under management in ESG criteria. There is also, and that's pretty interesting because I've seen in the panelists that in the panel that we have also SMEs, that there is a growing interest for SMEs. So it's also across the asset classes. There is a growing maturity as well. I think it's important to notice that. You may know that there are more than 300 texts across the globe in terms of ESG integration. So I'm thinking about soft regulation. Okay, we had a very interesting introduction in terms of hard regulation, but we need to understand that there are already soft regulation in place. And I think probably the most important and growing expectation we will have in the coming years, it's about transparency, accountability, and complexity. So I'll get back to your first question. I will just give you a quick introduction about Moody's ESG solution, because it's not the point today, but it's just to give you like a more colorful picture. I think it's interesting to notice that over the last 2-3 years, there has been a complete change of the competitive landscape in terms of ESG rating agency, and you can see right now that the sector is consolidating. So Moody's acquired Vigeo Eiris 2 years back, and that tells you to what extent the financial ecosystem is integrating ESG criteria. And I think this is super important. And the best way to illustrate that is that Moody's has created a dedicated department, which is Moody's ESG Solutions, where corporates and investors will be able to find the best way to take better decisions. Can you move the slide, please? Well, thank you. Just a transition slide before we discuss and we elaborate on performance and best performance. I think it's important to notice that our role as an ESG rating agency is to help the market both from an investor and from a company perspective, to shift the gear in terms of ESG integration. What we want to do, what we want to do, it's to empower investors and corporates to make better decisions when it comes to ESG and sustainability. Next slides, please. Okay, so that's a very important slide. We have discussed several things already. We have talked about the KPIs, the framework, whether it's TCFD or the SFD or NFRD, those kind of things. So Natasha, you mentioned earlier, you were talking about best performance and performance. So from an investor point of view, and even from a corporate point of view, I think it's pretty important to realize, to understand that the ESG or the sustainability area is a very broad field, very comprehensive field. So you have here all the kind of research that you provide. On the left side, you can see all the opinions that an ESG rating agency, and this is for Moody's specifically, can provide. So obviously we rate company, we assess company based on their ESG performance. We'll get back to that in a minute. But we also provide information or more granular information when it comes to energy transition or physical risk management or the way they deal with allegations and controversies. Martial gave us a very interesting example about, cutting job. I don't think that ESG rating agency have something against those kind of practices. However, what we will take into account is how those cutting job are dealt. That will be very important. And obviously, there are all those fantastic United Nations initiatives, such as the Global Compact or the SDGs. So we provide opinions, but we also collect information in order to have a more colorful picture. So it could be about those controversial activities, and we talked about the taxonomy earlier. What are the activities that can, help our economy to move toward a low carbon economy? So it's all about carbon footprint, those fossil fuel involvement, etc., etc. So with the slides, what I just want to say is that the term, the word performance, is something very broad. All right, you can be excellent in terms of, human rights management, but have terrible practices when it comes to, energy transition. So what is expected now, and we can move to the next slide, please, is that companies have a very comprehensive performance and consistent performance. Here in one slide, you have the way Moody's ESG solutions, and specifically Vigeo Eiris, appreciate, value, and understand ESG risk. Our goal at VE, at Vigeo Eiris, is to be the standard in terms of ESG. So we are super demanding. What we want to do for investors is to try to help them to understand where could be the risk as an investor, but the opportunities as well, and where could be also the room to maneuver for corporates. Because we want to be the standard, we rely on global standards. So we get rid of local regulation. So I think earlier we discussed the willingness of the EU to have a broader scope when it comes to taxonomy, etc. I fully agree with that. And as such, we rely on international standards because you may operate in different countries where social and environmental regulation are lower than Europe, for example. We are expecting companies to have a broad and consistent performance. So in order to do that, in order to raise the bar of excellence, we are expecting companies to align with those international standards such as OECD guidelines, ILO recommendation and authoritative documents, United Nations initiatives such as the PRI, the Global Compact, the SDGs. So once we have done that, we are in a very comfortable position because when we provide an opinion, we know that this represents the highest standard globally speaking. So you can't be under the spotlight if you rely on those aspects, if you raise the bar of your of excellence. And if we want to do that consistently, we have to do that in order to help companies and to help investors to have a comprehensive management. I remember Marshall mentioning that it has to be dealt at board level. I fully agree with that. And the right incentive has to be also identified for top executive. So what we have done is that we have cascaded down into different criteria and domain, etc. But at the end of the day, that may be a lot to you, but this is what investors are expecting now. We have more than 300 data points. In order to facilitate that job for corporates, what we do, and I think this is one of the key message of my presentation, we're expecting companies to have a strong leadership in terms of sustainability. We're expecting companies to commit publicly. That's one, in terms of leadership. We're expecting companies to be relevant when it comes to sustainability. For example, if you say diversity is important to us, well, that's not enough. You should be more specific. You should talk about gender balance, ethnicities, religious aspect, sexual orientation, etc. You have to be relevant. And also we are specifically interested in who has the leadership, who has the ownership of that commitment. So that's for leadership. So we are expecting companies to commit publicly, relevantly, and comprehensively. But otherwise, that could be seen as greenwashing. In order to avoid greenwashing, we want companies, we're expecting companies to demonstrate that they implement that commitment. So we are expecting them to implement that consistently. That means across the operation and not only at headquarter level. We're expecting companies to implement that in their different operation. We're expecting companies to do that on all the sub-criteria they're committed to. It's important. So there is no gap between the public communication and the reality. And when it comes to the results, and I'm echoing back to Natasha's question, we integrate quantitative information. So you can see here that quantitative aspects are important, but it's only 1/3. The qualitative aspect is super important to us. And I just wanted to bounce back on what Martial mentioned earlier. We need to create value. And this value, Moody's ESG solution in Video Iris, we want to identify the value you create with all your stakeholders. We have a stakeholder approach. We believe that the value creation can be identified, measured with all your stakeholders. So what we evaluate when we evaluate, and I'm echoing back to Natasha's question, when we evaluate the ESG performance, we evaluate the quality of your relationship with your stakeholders. So we are talking about internal stakeholders, top executive, employees, but also those who have like a direct link contract with you, your clients, your suppliers, etc. But also everything related to your management. So corporate governance, human rights, involvement in community, business behavior, the environmental challenges. This is what we evaluate. So this is what I wanted to say today. I wanted to say that quantitative information are important because they create a framework, a common understanding, a common language. But what we do as well is that we provide an opinion on the quality of the relationship that you have with your stakeholders. And we do that with engaging a strong dialogue with corporates.
Thank you very much, Kevin. That was very informative and very, very interesting. I will now quickly pass the floor to Marcus for the sake of time. Marcus will be giving us his views on how the asset manager's commitment to responsible investments can be evaluated through the RIBI index that his company has developed. So Marcus, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha, and greetings from Zurich to everyone. So what we do at Hirschl & Kramer is we created 3 years ago an index that looks at ESG, so to speak, in perhaps a little bit singular or at least 2 dimensions only. What we've observed is that over the past years, and you can see it in the graph here, that the inflow of ESG funds is tremendous. I think we've heard it a number of times today, but this graph just shows the inflow in terms of ESG of new money into asset managers or into funds, so to speak. And so we thought, okay, there's all this work around ESG and driving behavior and implementing it, but how well are actually the companies that sit at the level of money doing in terms of transporting this through their brand? And since I'm also teaching strategic brand management at Cass Business School, I wear the brand hat. My colleague, whom you see here on the picture, Jean-François Hirschl, wears more the asset management hat, and we bring this together. So if you can please advance one, I will explain how the index works. And you are, of course, all welcome to download this for free. This index is available for everybody. It's here to better the industry overall and to help companies essentially to progress towards doing greater good, contributing to greater societal good. And with our index, it's our objective to help give that a bit of a push. Okay, so what is this REBI? And I apologize, this is really, really hard for you to probably read on this slide, but it's essentially 2 dimensions. On one hand, we look at the commitment of asset managers, so to speak. We take as a source the principles of responsible investment, transparency report. So this is publicly available information. This is essentially what asset managers, they fill in a questionnaire, right? So it relies very much on what they tell the world, but we can publicly access it. We look at 7 top level dimensions, and you have them listed here: strategy and governance of responsible investment, for example. And then within that, we look at specific criteria. For example, how many people does an asset manager actually commit to ESG, for instance? And then we rate the asset managers on this dimension. It's the vertical dimension on commitment rating. And then if we look at the horizontal one, we rate them on the brand or brand architecture, so to speak. How well do they do to translate what they say they're doing in terms of commitment to ESG into their brands? We categorize them into 4 categories, and you can already see that on the top right is where everybody would like to be, the avant-gardists. They're essentially very high on commitment, and they're doing a really good job at telling the world what they do. On the bottom left, you see the traditionalists, the laggards. These are the large majority, unfortunately, still of companies. They're committed, they fill in a transparency report, but they're not actually doing a good job at telling society more broadly, and perhaps not even their investors, on how well they do, and their good intent doesn't show through their brand yet. And then we have a small category of aspirants. Those are often new entrants that actually do commit, perhaps do shine through in their brand, but they haven't quite made it yet. Okay, so 4 categories. The source of this is the IPE 500. International Pension Europe, that we use as an evaluation, and we rate about 284 companies currently, and in its 4th edition this year, we'll expand this to a global rating as well. So we give essentially the asset management industry a tool to look at themselves in the mirror and say, based on what you say, and based on what we perceive on publicly available information, this is how you rank in terms of commitment and in terms of doing that really well and telling the world more broadly through your brand. Next slide, please. So what does this mean? Well, one thing that I think is really important, and Marcel also mentioned it, is the notion of value. And if you think about ESG, this really, and we'll come back to this a little bit later on, is very often requiring a cultural shift. For example, Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, said that society is demanding that companies, both public and private, serve a social purpose. Some of you might have heard this a few years back, but I think what's really interesting interesting in his letters to investor is the statement that if you do not have a social purpose, you do not serve or state a social purpose going forward, we will no longer invest into you. So whilst you have a plethora of measurements, and we heard it a little bit this morning as well, difficulties perhaps as well to deal with this complexity of measuring it and translating it into materiality. Here is someone at the very top who says you have to fundamentally be embedding doing the right thing for society at large at the core of why you exist. So I think this goes really deep, and this really touches value systems. And which industry other than asset management at the level of money, so to speak, would be better placed to actually demonstrate and have a societal impact? So, of course, asset managers, through the money they have and perhaps at the board seats they might exert as well, have huge power in terms of how ESG is actually driven and how it drives the agenda of corporates. Not only listed companies primarily, but not only listed companies, especially if we think, for instance, of private equity within asset management. So their increased equity ownership, that is no longer just to proxy votes to say, well, we represent shareholders and therefore I delegate my responsibility to a board member, but they more actively take seats in companies to see through the interest of the shareholders in terms of ESG. So in addition to supporting shareholder resolutions, ESG asset managers are also engaging more directly. It's what we observe with management. So it's a good thing, we think, even if it doesn't have an impact immediately, at least it heightens the awareness within companies in terms of ESG and what I have to do to also not just greenwash it, but actually implement. Next slide, please. I'm conscious of our time, so I will keep this really, really swift. Here are some examples. If we think about the value systems and what Marcel mentioned earlier on, where this actually fundamentally starts inside a company, here are some purpose statements that we take from our evaluation. In red, you see this really isn't as good as we would want to see it. For instance, we help our clients build stronger portfolios. How does that contribute to greater societal good, right? If you are in the business of helping your investors generate more return, guess what? 40,000 funds, 5,000 asset managers are also in that business. Doesn't differentiate you. It's four wheels on a car. You need it to get going. And it definitely doesn't make society a better place. So something like this as a purpose statement, why you exist, we would not give you credit for it. However, if, for instance, your purpose statement is, I take the green one in the middle here, invest responsibly to enable economic prosperity and social progress, then we would rate that very highly. It's not a perfect purpose statement, but it demonstrates that you put it at the heart of why you exist. Okay, next slide, please. So if we take this, it's of course not enough, but if you really are serious about putting ESG at the heart of who you are, then it will shape what you do and how you do it from the inside out. It does impact everyone. Clearly, systems, processes are enablers, but culture is the driver here, we believe, because culture does eat strategy for breakfast, if you think about it. And it's based on shared values and beliefs. So a purpose statement that sounds nice is not enough. When we evaluate companies, we look at their value systems and their belief systems, and we look at coherence of values and belief systems that are gravitating around a spiritual core that hopefully is there not just to generate return, but also to do good. So embedding ESG is not only a matter of tech or system, it's also a pivot of belief systems that encompass more than profits or more than the lifeblood of business. As I've said, you need four wheels in a car to go. You need profit to be in business. That's generally understood, but life has moved on, and asset management in particular is moving on as well to go beyond. So it sounds simple, but it's actually a paradigm shift. So asset managers are pressured by the market, and that's a good thing. And it's also pressured by the regulators. That's also a good thing to accelerate in this space. There's tremendous progress. There's still a lot to be done, but ultimately it impacts everyone. And if I had one advice on how to embed ESG in your own company or as part of the board, then it's really to take a step back and look inside. Okay, I think this is the last slide I have, Natasha. I know this was relatively swift, but we had 7 minutes.
Marcus, that was very good. For the sake of time, I will make a very quick closing remark before we turn to questions, and I will ask also the panelists to answer the questions from the audience in a rather timely way. So thank you all. For, as final thought on my side, I would say that asset managers, through their shareholding, can pressure companies to introduce key ESG-related KPIs in order to calculate senior management and board compensation, practically based on sustainability goals. We're also seeing investors requiring from companies quarterly reporting on these ESG KPIs. However, bear in mind that as ESG metrics are not subject to auditing, at least as of now, executive remuneration based on such data sometimes can lead to greenwashing or be a touch inaccurate. At the bottom line, we do believe asset managers understand that if the companies that they invest in are taking sustainability seriously, this is shown ultimately in the way that these companies choose to allocate their capital. And according to my view, this is definitely easily measurable. So that's it from me. I will now open the floor to questions. We have a very interesting first question for Kevin, which refers, Kevin, to your protocol of company relations. I understand that during your rating process, the companies have a right to appeal the rating at some levels. Can you please very briefly describe this process and the interaction path? Thank you.
Sure. It's super important for Video Iris to engage a dialogue with corporates. As you rightly pointed, even though it's changing, there is lack of information. As I mentioned earlier, the set of questions we ask is quite broad. And sometimes it can be even surprising for corporates. In order to create a common language, we have a dedicated platform, the eConnect, where systematically, when we start an assessment cycle with companies, we tell them that we are going to go through this assessment. So they have the capacity, they have the right to help us fill in the questionnaire if we have missed some information. And at the end of the process, we even send a draft report. So it's not a draft report to negotiate, but it's just to ensure that we have the same level of understanding. So that's one. If they are not happy, if they are not satisfied with what we have said, they have the right to challenge us. They have the right to add document. But bear in mind that we are talking about public communication. You have mentioned something super interesting and super important, is that all those ESG indicators are not audited yet. There are countries where it's mandatory already, and auditing firms, and I'm an ex-KPMG, so I can talk about that. It has been a growing field over the last 10 years. So in order to go beyond that, to answer investors' needs for more for deeper information, more granular information, in order to help companies to go beyond the public communication, we have seen over the last 12, 18 months, I think, a very important trend where we do not assess companies on an unsolicited way. What we have seen is companies coming to us for a solicited rating where we engage with top management. And often, and that's pretty interesting to notice, that it comes from the board. The board requests the top management to have this ESG solicited rating, to have an in-depth understanding of what they do and where they go.
This is a very, very interesting topic, the one that you touched upon, and I definitely think is a new trend. We have one more question for Marcus here, really quickly. Marcus, you touched upon it very, very, very briefly, the issue of greenwashing. So practically, how can you detect through your index that all these funds simply rename their funds to ESG funds, masking existing portfolios?
Thank you. It's a very good question, and it's a very hard answer, I believe, to give, because it's essentially not fully possible. I don't think so, because we look at everything from the outside in. And the closest we get to get a feeling from inside out, is it really true, is generally linked to culture. So for instance, if we do perceive a very fluffy, nice sounding purpose statement, give the world, or make the world a better place, so to speak, but we don't detect that in either the commitment or essentially not in the value system, although albeit subjective, then we can really, with a very high level of certainty, decline from that there's unlikely going to be a culture that genuinely does care. And therefore, it's a way of subjectivity to answer that. But then you find, for example, in true impact boutiques, there is a spirit of generally wanting to do good. And the larger it gets, the more subjective it probably becomes to truly evaluate that. So there is no clear answer. We do use purpose and value systems as a proxy for culture. And if we detect that this is genuinely geared up to do the right thing from within, then that's a very high and a very good indicator to see that through as well in action. But it's not a clear-cut line.
Thank you, Marcus. I think we're running out of time here. So I would like to thank you both for your time, your very interesting insights. I would like to thank ecoDA for giving us the floor to have all these interesting views, and thank you all for participating. Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha. Thanks to
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you, all three of you. Evaristo, I think the host has stopped my camera. So can you please put on my camera?
Thank you, Sandra.
Okay. Okay, great, thank you. So we will now go to the second panel. The following discussion will be on performance measurement, and it will be led by Antonio Fuertes Zurita. Antonio worked at Accenture, and he has 28 years of experience in the energy business, and 15 on them on sustainability, which is very interesting today. He has a good corporate certificate by the Spanish IOD, so the Spanish Institute of Directors, where he also teaches sustainability. And he also was a board member of Better Call. So Antonio, in order for board members to walk the talk, what types of instruments do they have at their disposal? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Sandra, for inviting me to moderate the panel. Thank you to ecoDa, and just to a lot of things have been done here, but just to summarize some of them in order to put in context the panel. I would like to say that we have seen that we expect a deep change in reporting standards in the coming months. Traditional standards are joining forces, and European Union is working on its own standard. Sustainability indexes and ratings are improving the accuracy of their assessment, and it seems that the old dream of sustainability community is becoming true. I mean, the integration between financial and non-financial information. Secondly, ESG investing and finance are growing fast, and why do not think that in the future they will become mainstream? There is a massive reallocation of capital towards sustainable business. Investors sometimes have to choose between divest or engage, and passive investing is becoming more active. All of them look for good information on sustainability performance in order to make better decisions. Thirdly, from the point of view of regulation, what was voluntary is going to be soft law or hard law. For instance, according to the European Union Non-Financial Information Directive review, the consultation, to verify the materiality assessment process could be mandatory in the near future. In a recent consultation of European Union Commission on sustainable corporate governance, to avoid short-termism, one of the questions is if legislation should oblige companies to identify the stakeholders or if linking executive compensation to sustainability metrics should be mandatory. ESMA is demanding appropriate regulatory requirements to ensure the quality and reliability of ESG ratings and assessment. In this context, boards have important challenges ahead. International Corporate Governance Network, in its governance principles, emphasize the fiduciary duty of directors to act in good faith, due care, loyalty for the long-term success of the company. To do so, boards need robust and reliable assessment and frameworks to manage sustainability performance for the benefit of the companies, and also need good examples to be inspired, as we are going to see right now. And finally, this is just an opinion regarding sustainability, performance and measurements. This is my opinion. Board should create and support companies where people want to belong to. It comes to my mind the title of a poet, David White, who lives in Seattle, which he writes poems for business people. Is very interesting, and one of the titles of his book, the title of his book is "There is no house like the house of belonging." Belonging means reputation for clients, reputation for employees, reputation for suppliers. So this is the purpose of this panel. We invite to participate Lucina Berberian from S&P, Jonathan Norman from B-Lab, and Nicolas Sornot for Vestergaard. They are good examples and how companies and members of the board can be inspired. Lucina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Antonio. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation, and to ecoDa's as well. I would just like to spend a couple of minutes going through our latest ESG evaluation product, which has been launched not more than 2 years ago. It's a fairly recent product, and I'd like to just set the scene to start with that. As you can see here with the screen, our ESG evaluation is really, first of all, it's a partnership between the credit teams that are covering the credit ratings, together with the sustainability team, which I am part of, which we provide ESG expertise and sustainability focus, and the credit team provides obviously the expertise of the industry and of a specific entity. So this has been a joint effort, and that is the way we work forward, because there's a lot of let's say, added value that can be jointly put together under our ESG analysis. So the ESG evaluation, as you can see here, is really a cross-sector relative analysis of an entity's capacity to operate successfully in the future, and it's grounded in how several ESG factors can affect overall stakeholders here. Specific events and issues are material for this evaluation when, in our view, they can meaningfully affect the entity's either business operations, cash flows, legal or regulatory liabilities, relationships with all key stakeholders, either directly or indirectly through its value chain. We usually think that, more likely or near-term issues are typically driven by changes in regulations, for example, laws and customer behavior. However, we are also taking a look at certain long-term issues that can as well have significant impact, such as scarcities of natural resources, for example. This could really lead to structural shifts in market forces and in operating dynamics. An entity that can really positively influence ESG factors across its value chain or even across its customer base through its lending as well, investment underwriting, investment policies, is likely to be viewed by us as having less exposure, all of else being equal. So this is really grounded on, as we look at the whole umbrella of stakeholders, and basically, based on the fact that the shareholder theory or shareholder primacy is being currently challenged, as we all know, by a stakeholder balancing approach. And in here, we're trying to understand if indeed the company is meaningfully considering the whole stakeholder space, or if this is just like looked at a senior management level instead of really at the entire organization, so mid-management and also all the employee base. And when we talk about stakeholders, we are referring to, it's not only going, we are not only talking here about employees, we're also talking about the local employment, the local community, government regulations, customers, policyholders, of course, lenders and borrowers, together with suppliers, among others. So a high ESG evaluation score really indicates that the entity is relatively less prone to experiencing material ESG-related events, and it's potentially, from our perspective, better positioned to capitalize on ESG-related growth opportunities. So if we move on to the next slide, the starting point or the basis of our ESG evaluation is grounded on the sector and regional ESG atlas, which we have defined. These are risk atlas, as we call them, which we have been working on substantially across our credit teams. And for example, here you can see the regional ESG risk atlas, which really provides a global relative positioning of natural disaster risks, social standards, and governance standards across different countries and regions. So this is the foundation of our ESG analysis. And if we move on to the next slide, the second, let's say, arm of our ESG risk atlas is the sector ESG risk atlas. In here, we are providing yes?
Okay, we have lost the last 30 seconds, Lucina.
Oh, that's a pity. Can you hear me well now?
Yes, I think so.
Yes, thank you for letting me know. I was just saying 2 words on the ESG risk atlas, on the regional ESG risk atlas, which, thank you, you can see now here on the screen, together with the sector risk atlas, as we call it, are really the foundation of our ESG evaluation analysis. And in the regional ESG risk atlas, we've basically outlined analysis across different countries and regions to exposure to different natural disaster risks, social standards, and governance standards. And in the sector risk atlas, which is the current slide, we've positioned relatively all sectors to environmental and social exposures. And these are ranked between 1 and 6. For example, here you can see our views on exposure to environmental and social considerations being ranked from 1 to 6, 1 being the lowest exposed and 6 being the highest exposed. And these two are really, as you can see, relative analysis across regions and across sectors. So an entity can be in multiple regions and multiple sectors, and this would be our starting point to make them all, let's say, comparable. If we move on to the next slide, I'll just say 2 words around the one of the 2, let's say, main pillars of our analysis, which is the ESG profile. This really reflects our view of current and near-term exposures of an entity to observable ESG risks and opportunities relative to its peers and its sector itself. So it's important to understand that in here we're comparing with the sector trend, and our starting point is really the Robeco SAM questionnaire, the SAM CSA. So all of that information is our starting from a quantitative point of view, but there's also quite a lot of qualitative opinion that we take into consideration on top of that. We are really analyzing our view of the near to term medium effectiveness of the entity's current governance and policy framework and the trends in its performance across selected ESG indicators. We've assessed, as you can see here, 12 separate ESG factors for their potential to lead to a material financial impact on the entity, either directly or indirectly, if these are not mitigated. And if we move on to the next slide here on preparedness, this is basically the second pillar of our analysis, in which we are assessing the entity's long-term preparedness. But what do we mean by that? That's basically the capacity of the entity to anticipate and be able to adapt to a variety of long-term disruptors or disruptions, and in other words, the readiness of an entity to emerging risks and potential disruptors. This is a view that we will produce and we will create as we have a conversation, ideally with a board member. So we would like to have access to a board member in order to understand how the board functions at different factors, as you can see here. So first of all, how the board is aware and assessed of those different long-term disruptors that could impact the survival of the company in the long term. So a board that is not aware of the risks cannot really operate successfully in the long term from our perspective. And as well, we want to understand the culture, if this is bottom up as well, how the company acts, if it can be sufficiently agile when needed, and finally, what is the decision-making process? So this is all really theoretical, but just to say a few words of where we're coming from with our preparedness assessment. At board level, from our perspective, I mean, it is becoming more and more relevant and important to understand what are the sustainability issues at hand. We want to understand if the board is aware of those and be able to take the right decisions to make sure that the board is informed on latest trends and is continually getting trained practically to really put enough time aside to talk about strategic issues, not just at the end of the board meetings. Having a dedicated committee or body of sustainability at the board level is something that is very helpful and make as well the debate on sustainability issues more productive and efficient. And we have noted as well that the support from external consultants to assess materiality of certain themes is also something that is very remarkable and notable. When we talk about action plan, in here we're really focusing on how successful is the strategy going to be implemented, and if there is good communication and alignment between the board level, the board members and executives, and if there's really a company-wide effort, top down and down up, to execute that strategy. We want to understand how fast can a strategy be adapted or changed if needed. And we'll also ask the board member or the executive if the strategy had to be pivoted already in the past in a strategic shift that can really support our view on how agile can the company adapt to disruptions that are, haven't been able to be noted or on a day-to-day basis. And I think, of course, the pandemic is a really great example. We really want to understand how fast can this strategy be adapted, as I said, and what needs to happen and how can you get there to pivot the strategy if needed and have the right mindset. Finally, I would like to finalize by saying that there is indeed an increasing debate in the director's responsibility, which is not only at looking and focusing at the financials aspect of a company, but to look at everything that can impact sustainability of the company. I mean, it's very notable the increasing number of shareholders, investors that are asking the board members to have a deep dive or a deeper focus on this matter, on sustainability matters. From our perspective, if the board does not understand climate-related issues, the directors are either not doing a good job or there is indeed a blind spot in there. And there are several very, very relevant initiatives, for example, the Chapter 0 initiative, which is one of the examples in which directors can be trained to familiarize themselves on climate issues. So just to finalize here, we note that understanding how the board acts and functions at the board level, and how that strategy and decision making is flowed down to executives and across all the organization to be extremely relevant and the foundation of our ESG analysis for entities, for banks, financial institutions, insurance companies. So I'll stop there, Antonio, and back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Luisina. Going to the next presentation, Jonathan. B Corp is a community of leaders driving global movement on people using business as a force of good. Almost 4,000 companies have been certified. And well, we would like to know your experience about B Lab and B Corp. Thank you, Jonathan. The floor is yours.
Yeah, hello everyone, and thank you, Antonio and ecoDa's for creating this exchange opportunity. Yeah, at a glance, and being on probably the last part of the panel today, we had to stick on time, so I'll try to make it efficient as possible. But so since 2007, B-Lab began by building some of the basic market infrastructure. Entrepreneurs and investors said they needed to succeed. Including the ESG performance standard, a legal framework, and a unified brand. So in a short time, there are now nearly 4,000 certified B Corp, 8,000 benefit corporation, more than 100,000 of users of our B impact assessment, free and confidential tool, and 60 million of digital followers of B Corp. So this all came together with a unified vision of the power of business to create a more shared and durable prosperity. But before I go in detail about B Corp and B Lab works and theory of change, I'd like to share more detail on our work that we currently led on the EU policy side. So in the current wide-ranging consultation on sustainable corporate governance, this is the other side of the coin, as it were to all the work on sustainable finance. B-Lab in Europe coordinated a response to the Commission with support of 62 organizations in the B Corp movement with two key points. There is no way, and first, there is no way that the EU can meet its ambitious climate goals expressed in the Green Deal without a radical reform of corporate governance. So we think voluntary adoption of considering stakeholders' interest is not going to get us where we need to be fast enough. Secondly, B Corp are the living proof that this can be done, and that it provides benefit to all, including shareholders, over the long term. So this move to embrace all companies with some minimum mandatory requirement has yet to be defined with the other players, and is in line with the direction that B-Lab is driving system change. So just to corner and connect back to what has been said in the introduction. So yeah, the theory of change is likely redundant now for many here, but important to include in our conversation that this is a bigger play than ESG framework and certification. We are in an historic moment of transitioning from capitalism that is primarily shareholder driven to one that is stakeholder driven. And considering the stakeholder has long been practiced, making those stakeholders considering a legal obligation to is unprecedented. And for that, we've developed a framework and series of tools and process for certification. And so first pillar of the B Corp certification is performance measurement from direct and indirect impact or performance, but also taking into account the controversy review of company, as has been mentioned earlier in other from the other panelists. So in order to tackle inspirational goals and ESG strategy, the second key pillar, the accountability part, is really a key element of the B Corp movement and the B Corp certification. So the stakeholder governance that make and address sorry, if you can move to the next slide, I guess that will yeah, this one. Thank you very much. So first pillar, social environmental performance, with a score that a company should reach under 250 criteria from governance. I will go in detail on the slide right after, but the key second element here is the accountability, so the legal framework. So we ask company to adopt legal framework to consider all stakeholders. And this is game changing because you set at the highest level of the company in their strategic decision-making process this new fiduciary duty, in a way, to take into account social and environmental issues. And so to allocate resource to allow operation to adapt and to create new probably strategies to tackle. As I said, this is framework, there is constraint, but there is also a lot of opportunity, and we should keep that in mind when involving the accountability aspect and board members at the board members level. The second and the last pillar, sorry, is the transparency element. So we publish the result, the score of the company online in our directory, so you can see on the, if you move to the next slide, please, on their governance, on the worker community environment, and in the impact business model area, the customer area, where stand the company in the journey of sustainability and ESG performance. So we've set this very strong framework where you will find practice, metrics, guidance, to assess where you are in the journey, where you stand in regards to this global also community of company, because it integrates a benchmark. So it's a set of best practices. It's a free online confidential tool. I will recommend any board member to challenge the company they are overseeing to make a review and to give you a first flavor of what the company stand on those all major key topics that is related to ESG performance at the end of the day. Last but not least, if we move to the next slide, and knowing that we have today 150 sector of industry that are represented in the community, from SMEs to multinational company, we are definitely seeking to connect investor, because they play a very important role in this infrastructure market development. And so as today, we had probably more than 3 billion that's been allocated to those B Corp, because they are meeting the ESG performance, they are credible, and basically they are working the work. So if we move to the next slide, please, I just want to also say that ESG framework certification are key elements, and it led to a movement. So the B Corp movement is really committed for collective action. And for example, just to highlight one element of this movement and collective action dynamics here, more than 800 B Corp today commit for the net zero by 2030. So what does it mean in regards to the net zero and carbon emission reduction? Is that they will, as a catalyst and forces, they will reach the targets 20 years earlier than the Paris Agreement. And that's only possible when we have those combined dynamic, this catalyst and movement dynamics with science-based targets element, with also all the implication of the governance of a company. So trying to speed up a little bit here and probably to hand to the last slide of my introduction here. The key question for board member and for board representative is really how to protect the mission over the time. And let me just take one view, when we are seeing, unlike traditional defensive measure, benefit corporation governance will not draw fire from activist investor. But many advisors will recommend classified board and dual class stock, for example, as a way to address public market pressure. But they work by reducing the power of all shareholders, regardless of the orientation. And because of this power dynamic, those structures are controversial and can draw activist attention or deter investor participation. Benefit corporation governance is really a way to address this issue heads on and without affecting shareholder right. So this is a concrete market proposal. And I just share a couple of drivers here and views on what should be in mind for board member in this VUCA world. So hopefully I'm sticking in the timing now and give you the voice back, Antonio.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thirdly, our third panelist is Nicolas Chornot, representing Vestergaard. He is the CFO and COO. And Nicolas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tano. Hello, everyone. First, I would like to say it's an honor and a great privilege to be part of this webinar. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to present Vestergaard, and today is a special day for us as we are announcing our B Corp certification. So Vestergaard is focused on impacting people in a positive way. So this quote that you see on the slide by our owner, Mikkel Vestergaard Fransen, nicely rounds out what we are about. If you have an impact where millions of people are alive because of the work you do, you don't spend a lot of time thinking about the meaning of life. You are probably on the right path. So basically, Vestergaard manufactures products that are aimed at eradicating disease and poverty. Next slide, please. So who is Vestergaard and what do we do? We long believed in the power of business to improve the lives of the most vulnerable population, and we stand by the belief that doing good is in fact good business. The story of Vestergaard has humble beginnings. Originally, it was a small Danish family-owned textile business founded in the late 50s. Since then, Vestergaard has grown into a global business that has utilized our know-how of textiles to provide solutions to global health issues. We have head office located in Switzerland since 2005 in order to be close to multinational organizations that we serve, but we also have offices in India, teams all over Africa, a quality control and production site in Vietnam, and a research lab in Ghana. We employed indirectly 5,000 people in Vietnam in order to manufacture roughly 60 million bed nets every year. In terms of workforce and talents, people behind our business, we believe that diversity is central to our success. Our stakeholders are located in a variety of countries and continents, and we feel it is important that our workforce represents the cultures we engage with and the place where our products end up. So we have more women to men in the company, and our people come from a variety of professional background, from finance to sales to engineers and scientists. And I would say finally, our diversity support our effort to ensure our product development is based off of rigorous research and testing. So talking point regarding B Corp certification and what it means for us. B Corp certification represents, as Jonathan mentioned, an emerging group of companies that are using the power of business to create positive impacts on the world and generate a shared and valued durable prosperity for all. An additional element, so I think for Vestergaard being B Corp certified and already being a member of the United Nations Global Compact threatens our position and commitment to verifying our belief that doing good is good business. And as I mentioned before, this is a very exciting moment for us being able to make that public announcement. Next slide, please. So what does being B Corp certified provide? Achieving B Corp certification provide a few things. First, it is an opportunity for the company. Since its inception, Vestergaard has maintained a social conscience which is embraced by our owners and team, whether it is through our humanitarian mission or corporate social responsibility programs or employee giving or matching initiatives. We intend to prove that a for-profit company can operate sustainably, make a profit, and at the same time have a positive social impact. We saw the B Corp certification process as an opportunity to formalize and measure what we had already been doing for many years. Certification also provides benchmark for us as we aim to improve our impact. Secondly, achieving B Corp certification is also a strict and rigorous process. As part of the certification process, Vestergaard underwent a strict assessment process that explores our rigorous standard of governance, transparency, employee satisfaction, environment, community performance, and social impact. The entire process to assess and evaluate us by the B Corp audit team took roughly 3 months. Finally, B Corp certification is an enduring responsibility. We have an enduring responsibility to do the right things the right way for our business, for our team, for our client, for stakeholders, for potential clients, for potential talents. This is very important when you want to recruit new people and talented young generation. I think they are very interested in having companies that have positive impact on the planet, but also having a positive impact on the environment and on the community in which we operate. Earning and remaining certified involves taking greater strides for transparency and accountability to parties outside of our own organization that are committed to collectively using business as a force for good. So in order to somehow wrap up, B Corp for Vestergaard is just a starting point for us. In 2021, 2021 will represent a year where we take greater strides towards additional impact assessments, including measuring and identifying ways to reduce our carbon footprint, but also aligning our business to key SDGs that we will demonstrate targeted progress years after years. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Nicolas. And well, we are in the period of question and answers. There is a question for you, Nicolas, regarding the role of the board in the B certification. How do you achieve the board to be engaged in this process?
So thank you, Antonio. I think that's a good question. Maybe let me start by repeating what was mentioned earlier. I think it is at the end of the day a board decision. The board has the responsibility to decide how far they want to go in order to address the coming changes. So obviously the implication of Vestergaard board, I mean, from the beginning, the board was strongly involved in this B Corp process. Management kept the board updated on each of the milestones that we were achieving. There was also, for example, bylaw modifications that is mandatory and that was approved by the board. But I would say that due to the mission and values of Vestergaard, it was not a huge shift from our strategy and a pretty straightforward decision for the board. Also, we need to bear in mind that being B Corp adds an additional certification that brings additional assurance to the board that the company is on the right path in terms of sustainability impact / ESG, especially in the light of the audit performed at the end of the assessment process by the B Corp team.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicolas. There is a question for Luisina regarding the communication channels between S&P and the company assessed during the assessment evaluation process.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is, I would say that during the ESG evaluation process, we'd like to take the opportunity to have an open conversation with the company, because we think that ESG analysis goes well beyond quantitative data to start with, and we'd like to understand from the company's point of view the explanation behind potential specific trend on a specific factor or a controversy or lessons learned. And as well, as I said before during my presentation, to have access to a board member if possible. So let's say that the ESG evaluation is indeed grounded in the opportunity to have access to the company as across several steps through the analysis, and specifically at least twice in which we discuss with the company any questions that we might have on ESG data and their future perspective, and the meeting with the board member. I don't know, Antonio, if that answers the question.
Yes, sure.
Yes?
Thank you, Luisina.
Mm-hmm.
And final question for Jonathan. Jonathan, also, it will be important to know how how the board is involved in the certification process, the certification process, and from your point of view.
Yeah, so as I say, we ask companies to amend their bylaw, so to change their article of association. So two elements depending the countries, but from the purpose of the company, and then adding a specific decision element and duties around taking care of all stakeholders across the operation of the company. So this process pushed definitely. You can't drive the certification without involving the board. So you need to have a general assembly. So to educate the board, what does it mean to become a B Corp? What are the requirements? But also, how this ESG impact-driven strategy will transform the company, because you set the requirement and the duty at the top level of the company. So they really become accountable for in their decision-making process. So yeah, that's not an easy step, and that leads to best practice around education, as we mentioned, but many of the governance best practices to ensure that you have a committee and probably a supervisory board member that will oversee the sustainability strategy or the ESG performance strategy, and so that you have allocated the resource and so and so. So yeah, becoming a B Corp, it's transforming the company definitely, and led to probably various stage of learning, and that's the power of the community at the end of the day. We've now done all of those companies and CEOs and board members that have taking the lead in addressing, the purpose and make the change at the top DNA level.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Well, this is the final question, and thank you very much, Lucina, Jonathan, Nicholas, and it has been very interesting to know, to listen to your point of views and your approaches. And Sandra, I'm back to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the panelists and thanks to Antonio too. It's a huge challenge, of course, the performance measurement. We will talk about it also in the last panel discussion that aims to be an inspiration for board members on how to walk the talk, because talking is important, but walking the talk is even more important. And this will be led by Livia Pierre-Mattei, who has an experience of over 30 years in sustainable business transformation, and this from 3 different perspectives: as an independent board advisor, also as a top executive board member and co-founder of an international strategic consulting boutique on change management, as an executive and board member in non-profit entities, developing synergies between profits and non-profits. And last but not least, also she researches and publishes on non-financial transformation and governance, and she's member of the Scientific Committee of Net Community, where she coordinates since 2014 the Reflection Group on Board Leadership and Sustainability. Thank you, Livia, in advance for moderating our last panel.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for this kind and extensive introduction. Thank you very much. And most of all, for inviting me to this panel, to moderating this panel. I would also like to thank the staff of ecoDa, because organizing such an outstanding and participated initiative is not easy. So thanks very much. Our panel title is Inspiration to Walk the Talk. We, in fact, would like to share with you some consideration on the extra value that companies and the board of directors can generate in the medium and long term. And when they walk the talk of the transformational journey that is needed to fully integrate ESG into business models and strategies. So we would like to reflect also on the opportunities and difficulties faced along the way by board members with a very distinguished panel. So Sandra is on the panel. with us, and she will tell us her experience on Fluxes and this very relevant energy company operating in Belgium and internationally. Lasse Bolander is with us, and he's chairman of the board of a very one of the largest consumer cooperative founded more than 100 years ago in Denmark, and now having almost more than 1.5 million members. And Nicolano then is with us as well, board member, but also with an extensive and deep experience as manager and top manager in the sustainability area. To set the ground, I will share with you the findings of the report that CONSOB, which is the Italian SEC, publishes since the adoption of the non-financial statement regulation. Its title, here it is marked, is Non-Financial Information as a Driver of Transformation. Many of you, Lucina, Lars and Vestergaard, everybody in the different panels have discussed the issue of transformation and culture. This study was prepared by Nadia Linciano and Angela Ciavarella of CONSOB. I'm co-author with them. And in the second part, there is research on board leadership on the transformational change needed that we set up every year with Simona Cosma and Paola Schwitzer of Net Community. This study is quite dynamic because as processes, the things cannot be static. We've been carrying on this study for the last 4 years. This year is the 5th. We're finalizing the next version. And what we have been doing is to try to assess if there is any impact of the non-financial statement on business models, governance, and strategies of all of the companies that publish in Italy the non-financial statement. So that represent the system of companies that are quite interested in the non-financial transformation if they publish the non-financial statement. We wanted to assess if and how this transformation is happening and with what kind of behaviors companies and their boards are leading this transformation. And in the second part, we also work on board leadership of this transformation. So I would go to the next slide because we want to see, we created this chart to synthesize, to summarize the findings of the report. We work on 3 different steps of transformation. This is a model of transformation, and it works on awareness, capabilities, and engagement. Awareness, we try to position all the behaviors that are connected to compliance with the rule, the decree that is related to the non-financial statement, as well as if and how sustainability KPIs and the non-financial KPIs are dedicated and identified, and if and how companies are at least communicating their aspiration in terms of performance on non-financial transformation. But communicating is talk, is not walk. So to walk, and this is why the title of this session is Inspiration to Walk the Talk, you have to at least exercise different capabilities. And so in the second part of the study, we look at behaviors describing capabilities. If these capabilities, new capabilities to lead the transformation are carried on. The third one is engagement. When people are fully engaged, the performance happens without any other need of pushing it, of reminding them to act decision-making in a different way, to act different behaviors. So if we go to the findings, to the next slide, thanks Manon, you see that we worked the boxy areas, awareness and capabilities, are boxy because those behaviors, the black behaviors are for companies and the red behaviors are for board of directors. Those behaviors are being analyzed and read on the corporate storytelling included in the non-financial statement. The last column of the chart is analyzed through the strategic plans that are abstract of strategic that are presented by companies in the roadshows with investors. So we decided that for training, it would be good to work on non-financial statements to assess full engagement of companies. We have to really go to investor relation area of the website and understand if and how strategic plans are fully connected and fully integrated with ESG. And so in the first part of the chart, we see awareness and a strong focus on materiality analysis, because we think that materiality is the key for not only non-financial statement, but an integrated decision-making program. And we also look at board of directors behaviors in terms of guidelines of self-evaluation, in terms of inductions. The last part describes the real walk. We have one company out of all of those who last year published a non-financial statement who used the materiality analysis, which is the focus for decision-making in terms of integration of ESG into strategies, as a pillar of the strategic plan presented to investors. We have only 5, they are all energy companies that are fully connecting to their strategic presentations the ESG elements to financial elements. So this is the picture of the system. In the second part of the report, we deal with board leadership on the transformation. This research also has been carried on for a number of years. We are at the 5th this year. And if we look, we have an extraction of main issues. These are behaviors, and it's a survey carried on net community members. And here we see the gap existing between what independent directors think of if they should or not play a more active role in strategies and risk assessment in a long-term perspective, and the real what happens in reality. The gap is quite significant. We have 70% of them thinking they should, 44 saying that this happens in the boards they are acting on. If we go to the next slide, we see that only 41% of respondents fully believes, we are describing data of last year, that ESG integrated strategy has a positive impact on financial performance. And then let's go to the next slide, which is the final one that we selected. Here are 2 clusters of behaviors of board of directors member, leading and lagging. We wanted to assess the level of leadership on the transformational journey to integrate ESG into strategies and business plans. And as you see, lagging behavior are increasing versus leading. So there is more an approval style, approval behavior, approval related behaviors than definition, proactive behavior, establishment of long-term objectives and so on. So leadership in board of directors still has a long way to go, at least in Italy. Now I would go to our panel and ask our panel if and how this, what are your first reaction to the survey carried out by Net Community on board leadership of this transformation, how these outcomes fit with your concrete experience. So I would leave the floor to Sandra, and then Nicola, and then Lasse for an answer to this question. How much this represents your reality?
Thank you, Livia. Thank you for sharing the conclusions of this very interesting report with us. And I agreed based on the report to make two kinds of remarks, but I will be short and taking into account the time that is advancing. That's what is the actual situation in Belgium. And then secondly, the testimonial or the example of what the board is living and doing at Fluxes, as you said, a Belgian energy company. So first of all, in Belgium, I think as in the other countries, we really feel that change is going on and that there is a momentum. There was a survey carried out during the New Year's reception, the New Year's event. We had not really a reception, of course, in COVID times. We had with Euronext in January. And it was very clear, based on the results of this survey, that sustainability and ESG matters are really coming on the agendas of the boards since 2019. So I think there is an acceleration going on and there is really a momentum to go forward. This is also supported by legal initiatives and by soft law. We have our new corporate governance code since last year that is saying explicitly that the board should pursue sustainable value creation, and that to do so, the board should develop an inclusive approach, balancing the interest of stakeholders and of shareholders. There's also the modification of Belgian law since 2019, making it possible for Belgian companies to adapt a statute that is comparable to the French entreprise à mission, so to have another objective, another purpose in their articles of association than merely the profit for shareholders. From a legal point of view, one can ask himself or herself whether it was really necessary to change the law for that, but that's of course another discussion which is not the subject of today. So some words about Fluxes. I arrived at the Fluxes board in May 2019, and I can say that a very long path has been traveled meanwhile. I wanted to take this example because a lot is being said about ESG and sustainability, but I think that when one is really working with this in board of directors, we have to notice that it is not a fairy tale. It is very hard work, and it's really trying to find a balance between sometimes very conflicting objectives, conflicting interests, and conflicting stakeholders. So who is Fluxes? Fluxes is the Belgian operator of the natural gas transmission network. And in fact, Fluxes has three kinds of activities, as you see on this slide. An activity of transmission to end users in Belgium through pipelines, but also a border-to-border activity. Second activity is the LNG terminaling in Zeebrugge, where Fluxes sells capacity for unloading and loading LNG carriers, and also a storage for LNG, and then a storage activity in Loonhout. Fluxes as a whole, as a group, has 1,200 employees and has a stable stakeholders. 77% is in the hands of public gas, so public organization, the Belgian municipal holding company in the gas sector. 20% is in the hands of the Caisse de dépôt et du placement du Québec, and a bit more than 2% is in the hands of FPIM, SFPI, the Belgian Federal Holding and Investment Company. And since 2012, Fluxes employees and management received at several occasions the opportunity to also become a shareholder. Next slide, please, Manon. Of course, this all brings us to important governance challenges, because the Fluxes is in the middle of the energy transition debate, and it is really a question of making the right choices at the right moment. I do not think the context needs a lot of explanation, and you see it set out on this slide. The energy transition, we all agree on that, is not an option anymore, but is today part of the only path forward. Also taking into account, and we have heard it at the introduction of this webinar, the quick evolution of the regulatory context, but also the European Green Deal, the EU recovery plan with an investment window of 750 billion euro in the meantime, and also the Belgian recovery plan with an envelope of 5.75 billion euro, of which an important part, according to the last plans, more than half, will be focusing on the transition towards climate neutrality. So Fluxes took up that challenge and is working on this at full, focusing first on the industry. And why? For two reasons. Because first of all, 40% of the carbon emissions in Belgium originate from industry, but also for a cost efficiency reason, because of course the energy transition, I said it is not a fairy tale, has a cost, comes at a cost, and so this cost has to be taken into account. And so this reason is that all large industrial companies are directly connected to the Fluxes network. So next slide, please. The strategy of Fluxes has been redefined since 2019. And so the idea, it goes further than just building a better world. The idea is to be the transporter of the future energy carriers. The plan is to have a step-by-step approach and to reconfigure the natural gas network in Belgium to be able to transport three kinds of molecules: methane, hydrogen, and carbon. And this, as I said, will be done stepwise, developing local clusters, then connecting the clusters, and then complementing the clusters by interconnecting with neighboring systems in the surrounding countries. But of course, this all brings governance challenges. As I said, it is hard work and we need to get beyond the hype. Fluxes started with a materiality analysis in 2019. You can read the details of this in the annual report, and implying first mapping and then implying the relevant stakeholders. And the relevant stakeholders are the employees, of course, but also the local residents, the shareholders, as I said, stable shareholders, the customers, the suppliers, but also public being, Fluxes being a public company, the authorities and the regulators. And what came out of this analysis is that the most important concerns were safety, operational reliability, business integrity, and financial strength. So this for the materiality analysis. Another challenge is the interaction between the governance actors. The initiative is taken by the management. The CEO is clearly the leader of the transformation with a dedicated team, but also with dedicated resources. And that is also where the board of directors comes in. Another point of attention, and especially then for the board of directors in these highly technical matters, is of course board leadership. It is highly technical, and so the board needs to be very well equipped to deal with these matters. This is also a question, of course, of board composition, and then board composition in a regulated environment, which makes it a double challenge. I think we deal with it at Fluxes in several ways. First of all, with a thorough theme of education of board members, but also if you take a look at the composition of the board, you see that a lot of the board members are experts out of the energy sector. So there is already a lot of expertise on the board. But also, as I say, the board members are being educated, are getting specific sessions to put them all at an equal level. So we had 2 strategic sessions with the board during the year 2020 to make sure that all board members are understanding what is going on. Is there a specific sustainability committee? No, there is not, but this task is taken up by the Strategic Advice Committee. And just to give you an idea, the Strategic Advice Committee had not less than 6 sessions working on this topic only during the year 2020. So this is being taken very seriously. I also heard other speakers and panelists mention the duration of board time dedicated to the subject and the place of the subject on the agenda. At Fluxes, the subject is taking a very important place on the agenda. It is on the agenda of every board meeting, and as I say, which is also normal because we are following a step-by-step approach. So as I said already, the energy transition is not just a matter for the Fluxes shareholders, the board and the management. It touches society at large and each and every one of us. And so, of course, it is also investment driven and no operator can do it alone given the huge cost also of the transition. So Fluxes is starting with the Belgian industry, but also with the launch at the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021 of a cooperative commercial process with the industry, inviting the industry, but also inviting the other stakeholders to collaborate, to align the initiatives. So an info session was opened in January 2021, and please go to the website and you can read more about it. So as we have seen also in Livia's presentation, non-financial information is key. This is, however, a challenge at this very early stage where everything is under the strictest embargo and every leak, of course, can do big harm. And I also listened with a lot of attention to Marcial Campos talking about a dilemma between confidentiality and transparency, and I could not agree more with him. And then I think last of not least, of course, the energy sector is of public order, which means that all strategy-related discussions take a very special place within a very specific context. It does not only mean that the public shareholder has a special say on the matter, but also that this is subject to a public debate. And so, which means that all the governance questions need to get double attention. So this is for my sharing of the Fluxes experience, real-life governance challenges related to the energy transition. I'm looking forward to your further questions in this matter.
Thanks, Sandra. I will go with Nicola and then Lasse. Or Lasse, you are on already, so go ahead. What is your experience in COP as board members of this transformation? We cannot hear you, Lasse.
This is a transformation that we as a board have to relate to on a day-to-day basis. We are a consumer cooperative. We are one of the largest grocery retail companies in Denmark, and we have millions of customers visiting us every week. And typically they come late in the afternoon. They are tired after work. Their children are tired. They need just to find something to eat for dinner. They don't have the time to be very aware of which products they choose, whether they are sustainable or not. They have to believe in us. So we as a retailer have a huge responsibility on a day-to-day basis to make sure that the consumers can make good choices for themselves. So besides having to create order in our own house, which all companies have to do, we have to put pressure all the time on our suppliers. We have many suppliers all around the world. We have to make sure that they behave in all manners, that they move towards a more sustainable production methods, that they work with the employees in manners that we can take responsibility for. And we also have a responsibility for nudging the consumers to make smarter choices. Make sure we put the right products at the right places in the store. We give them good recipes for more healthy living or more sustainable living. So this is an agenda that we are working on, I would say, on a day-to-day basis, and which you can also then see and feel in the boardroom. We have the advantage in Co-op of being a cooperative, meaning that we have for more than 150 years in our statutes, it has been written that we have to do good. We have to make money, we have to be a business, but we also have to do good. And we have therefore, you can say, been a B Corp from the beginning. That is a great help when we are in the boardroom, because we know that we cannot just look at one bottom line. I'm also board member of other companies where we haven't gotten to the point where we have agreed on a purpose besides making money. And in those companies, the discussions are more difficult, but they're actually not difficult in Co-op. But of course, we still have to prioritize between a lot of activities we want to focus on when it comes to being sustainable. Even though Co-op, at least in the Danish context, is as a large company, we can't really save the world. We have to focus on areas where we want to make a change. And that is I would say, ongoing discussion in the board. We make strategic CSR plans that goes along with the normal strategy plans. We have twice a year reviews of our progress when it comes to our CSR activities. We are also now working on putting CSR goals into the bonus schemes of the top management team. We are working on having ESG measures in addition to the normal financial measures when it comes to investments. And we can see that measuring things and also acknowledging progress is a very, very good and very practical way of moving from awareness to action. Because as you can imagine, everybody agrees that we have to do something in Co-op, but do we really do anything? And I have learned at least that by measuring things and setting goals that you can actually measure, we progress. We were also one of the first companies in Denmark that joined Global Compact many years ago. And it has been a very good tool for us to make sure that we actually progress from year to year. We have also signed up to using science-based targets when it comes to measuring our climate impact. And we now measure that in the same way as we measure revenues per store or margins per store or cost development. And that is, I would say, probably the most important thing we have done, and the best advice I can give to other companies, that start measuring what you're doing, then you actually progress. So and then in addition, maybe I should mention that it's also important for companies to have some symbolic projects or symbolic things you do, so that everybody in the organization understands what it's all about. We have many projects like that in Co-op. One of the more, you can say, spectacular ones is that we set up a coffee roasting facility in Kenya, in East Africa, where we roast the coffee, put it in consumer packages, then go directly on the shelves in our stores in Denmark. We thereby cut out all the middlemen. We know the farmers we source from. It's a relatively small project, but it's a very symbolic project that says something about what we want to do. We, of course, also now looking at putting solar panels on our stores and on our warehouses. That's also something we celebrate in the company. So it's very important that we make it tangible and measurable. And then, of course, also making sure that it's part of the strategic discussion in the board as any other strategic discussion. So I think that would be also, in respect of time, be my input for now.
Thank you very much, Lasse. You also have a deep experience in SMEs, so I will ask you something in the second round. And let's go to Nicola, your experience as a board member and your background in sustainability. How do they combine in your experience?
Thank you very much. Many thanks, Livia. Many thanks for the presentation earlier on. And being the last speaker, I will maybe shorten the presentation. I'd be pleased to to build, of course, on my corporate experience, linking strategy and ESG matters, but of course here I'll more reflect with the board perspective on the discussion we had within the Non-Executive Director Institute with regards to ESG. Many thanks for titling this panel Walk the Talk, and indeed one need to be fully equipped for the walk, so to say, when walking the talk, and it was made crystal clear by the previous panel about the compass, the ESG ambition we should pursue. It's about integrating ESG and sustainability in the strategic decision-making process of the company. It's about equipping the board of directors with clear oversight, expertise, and accountability on ESG strategy, and of course, integration into business. Now, I don't want to take it for granted. I don't want to sound over-optimistic about the execution, but I tend to believe that to a large extent, this such ESG approach are becoming mainstream, and that many directors are already largely committed to this path with the conviction that it's a matter of competitiveness. Livia asked me to say a few words on the French context and asked whether the legal framework can be a catalyst or can accelerate this transformation and the path towards ESG integration. And indeed, in France, the framework has been quite conducive since 2019. For example, in 2019, France enacted a legislation introducing that the company should be managing its corporate interest, taking into consideration the social and environmental issues, and that the boards and management make it part of their respective assignments. And of course, also the company are encouraged to incorporate social objectives in their corporate purpose and as part of their bylaws. So to answer Lydia's questions, yes, I think this corpus of guidelines and this principle-based framework has been quite conducive to the integration of ESG and has been a catalyst. And maybe we can talk about that later on if we discuss the ongoing EU initiative. The second point I would like to make, and a lot has been said in the previous panels, is of course about the importance of the so-called non-financial information, because it's very important as we walk the talk. Let's be clear, there is room for clarification in the area of non-financial reporting and disclosure, and this is really an understatement. So the work that is conducted at EU level, that EFRAG is doing, and EU at large, is remarkable and of utmost importance. Boards are on the front line as users, as rollers, as promoters, focusing on materiality of robustness of information. There are plenty of questions that the board should focus on. We are currently working on it, and I don't have time to elaborate. And if I had to pick one area of attention, I would mention consistency. Of course, the board should ensure consistency between the ESG ambition and the actual integration into business. Of course, and it's been said, non-financial information should be addressed as seriously as financial information. And Patrick de Campo stressed it. Now, I would maybe add one dimension to that, is that in a company, and especially in a listed company, the rules that are governing the use of financial information are very stringent. Everybody knows that financial information is a serious matter. Now, when it comes to non-financial information, it looks like everybody seems entitled to be highly creative with regards to the information that is displayed, and which may really alter the consistency of the non-financial information and generate risks. So my point is the following: non-financial information is becoming consequential, and we need to be much more disciplined about it in the positive sense of the term. I think this consistency issue, externally and internally, is very important if we want to walk the talk properly. And then my last point will be about a very practical challenge that we face as we walk the talk. Martial mentioned it, Sandra alluded to it as well, is that in the real life, to be very concrete, the company and the board will be confronted with an increasing variety of expectations from stakeholders. And those expectations will be in many cases conflicting, contradictory. Let's be clear, it's in the genuine interest of the company to conduct a thorough mapping of its relevant stakeholders and to be as inclusive as possible. The matter of fact, at the end of the day, the board is continuously arbitrating stakeholders' conflicting expectations, and directors are apparently exercising their judgment in balancing these stakeholders' interests to address very, very complex and moving situation. So this is my view, the biggest really concrete practical challenge that we face as we walk the talk, i.e. our capacity to explain how we are making a strategic decision and how we are arbitrating, if you will, conflicting expectations from a variety of stakeholders. And with respect to time, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of this panel. And this issue of conflicting expectations among stakeholders is the main issue and is strongly connected to materiality and to the need for the board to be fully involved in the identification of those issues that really can generate value in the long term. That's why in the CONSOB research, we focus so much on the quality of materiality and on an active role of boards on this. So I would like to go to a second very quick round that in a way Nicolas anticipated. So thank you very much, Nicolas. Regulation and competitiveness of the system. In the CONSOB report, we look at a non-financial statement as a regulatory issue to understand if it impacts the competitiveness of the system of companies that publish the non-financial statement. What is your experience in terms of how regulation can accelerate the transformation, and how much culture leadership of the board, because many have talked in the previous panels of culture and of the need to eat culture for breakfast, because culture eats strategy for breakfast, like Marcus was saying before. How much board leadership, which is a cultural issue, can really transform and additionally accelerate the competitiveness of the company that is definitely kicked off by regulation, if there is a connection among these three areas. I would go to Sandra and Lasse, and then Nicolas. We have a short time, but we can definitely make a point on this.
I'll try to be as precise as possible, Livia. Thank you also to Lasse and Nicola for their outstanding and interesting contributions. I think board leadership is key, Livia. I totally agree with the findings of your report. But I think that at the current stage, legislation is inevitable. I mean, we have tried for quite a long time without legislation, and things are not advancing fast enough. And there is today a momentum, and I think we will not be able to stop legislation that is coming towards us. So I would like to draw the attention to 3 points. I mean, and I hope the policymakers are still listening and that they will take their pens and write down the 3 points of attention. I think first, if we think about regulatory frameworks, of course, they are important because we need comparability to be able to compare, but we have to be prudent because they might mislead, because they might force to compare things that are not really comparable. So there is a risk of simplifying things. And who says simplifying says ticking the box and says greenwashing. So frameworks, yes, but they need really to be well thought. And as I see, they are going so fast now, policymakers, that I'm a little bit skeptical about will they be sufficiently well thought? So that is a first point I would like to make. regarding these regulatory frameworks. And then secondly, I think you already mentioned it, Livia, very important is the level playing field. I mean, we cannot today in Europe allow that we will be confronted with rules that will be different for non-European players and that will hamper even more our competitive advantage. So I think that is the second element that really is key and that should be taken into account when considering any form of regulation. And then last point I would like to highlight is that we have to take into account the post-COVID-19 situation. Now we're living a tremendous crisis. Of course, this is an opportunity for acceleration. I totally agree, but we should also take into account that this crisis has created fear, and that fear is not good for entrepreneurship. So if we want to really build the new Europe and to create a competitive advantage, I think we should at least also think about encouraging measures and not only think about making entrepreneuring even more difficult for companies. So that were the 3 points I wanted to make.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Lasse, competitiveness and regulation, what do you think?
Well, then I will probably have maybe a slightly more liberal point of view here. I see that the market forces are actually moving us in the right direction. I don't know any company or brand owner who doesn't want to behave these days, because consumers, they are very, very quick to move their consumption patterns to another company. Nobody wants to be in a situation where suddenly you are caught using child labor in your overseas production facilities. Investors are increasingly looking for, as we also heard earlier today, they look for high ESG value companies instead of black companies. So investment money are flowing in the right direction, consumers are moving in the right direction, and then the market forces will actually force the companies to move in the right direction. So I'm actually concerned about asking politicians for more regulation, because typically politicians are not very good at running business, and they're not very good at making regulation that actually works. I agree, though, that having reporting standards, having standards for when you can claim that something is climate positive is good. I also agree that we should work towards a level playing field. So of course we need the politicians to set some framework for what we do, but I don't like the idea that they should specifically regulate how we should operate. I'm quite confident that business can do that themselves. I think we should, as companies and maybe also as board organizations, we should focus much more on how we can help our members and the companies to navigate in this new world. I think the point about multi-stakeholder management and who should you focus on when and how is something that many boards struggle with. And as I think you also mentioned earlier, I'm also chairman of a number of smaller companies board, and I see there a completely different world than I see in Coop and other big companies, because in big companies, you are typically well aware of this. You typically have very high skilled professionals working with CSR issues all the time. And you have the resources to think about it. Whereas in small companies, you are aware, at least in our part of the world, you are aware you have to do something, because your customers are also asking you for proof that you are moving in the right direction, but you typically don't have the resources to do it. And there you are in the boardroom where you have to help the management team make the right decisions, have to prioritize between all the stakeholders who are yelling at you, who should you focus on and who should you leave, where should you put your resources and energy, and then actually help the company doing something instead of maybe sitting slightly paralyzed, that I think some small companies do right now. So I think my point is that we should look inwards in the companies, help ourselves to become better corporate citizens instead of asking the politicians for help, because I don't think we all the time like their help.
Thank you very much, Lasse. I would say that there are a number of similarities between what Sandra was saying and what you are saying, even if from different perspectives, but definitely regulation is an issue, a big issue. It can accelerate sometimes, it can delay sometimes, it has to be, it can create troubles in terms of competitiveness. So Nicola, what do you think? And then I would just, Sandra, because I see that you have something to say, maybe.
Yeah, thank you, Olivia. Very quickly. So I heard Lasse, and I of course agree to some extent. And equally, the European Union has launched a remarkable set of initiatives, with a really an holistic framework, with the Green Deal, the EU Action Plan, and linking that with the ambitious agenda in the fields of sustainable finance, non-financial reporting, corporate disclosure, and mandatory due diligence, and so on. The approach, or this approach, in my view, can be a really formidable driver of competitiveness for the European companies, provided, and Sandra made it clear that this framework ensures a level playing field. This means that the duties for the European companies and non-European companies operating in the European market should be consistent also with the existing global framework, clearly. So we have really to make that clear, and to under that condition, of course, it can be a driver of competitiveness. And I think it was made clear by the regulators, by Dsg FISMA this morning. Patrick de Campo also alluded to it, and so on. One word, as Lasse said it, for SMEs, clearly there should be this principle of proportionality. And most importantly, and more interestingly, in my view, we should think about some, capacity building mechanism to make sure that they are part of the journey and that they're also benefiting from this momentum. And I stay here, Olivia.
Thank you very much. Sandra, you want to add something to?
Yes, I just wanted to react to the very pertinent remarks of Lasse. I totally agree with him that market forces are key, and market forces have changed, and they're really pushing companies to act. And that was, in fact, that corresponds to the second point I wanted to make. No, even the first point that was saying that regulatory frameworks can mislead because they tend to compare things that are not necessarily comparable, where market forces don't do this. So there's much more nuance in market forces. So I agree with you that this is today the first driver of the behavior of companies.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel. We are a little delayed.
We lost you.
We lost Livia.
Time is up.
She has been cut off. No. So, okay. Is she still coming back, Livia? Are you coming back to close this session? I think are there questions? That's the question. She's coming back. Okay, so thank you for this very interesting panel. It is, and thank you, Livia. It is time now to conclude our webinar. I will give the floor to conclude Mark Pitty, who is coordinator of the Chapter 0 in Brussels. Welcome, Mark, and he has kindly accepted to inform us about this initiative of the World Economic Forum. So, Mark, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sandra. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you perfectly, and I see you also.
Thank you. As the 15th speaker this morning, I'll try to be short and focused. I'm very pleased to intervene this morning at the end of these extremely interesting sessions of your webinar. Indeed, I've learned a lot about existing hard and soft law perspective down to a number of impressive practices already implemented by numerous market players. I'm therefore very happy and even excited to see that ESG and amongst them the climate governance is today at the heart of the boardroom discussions of so many initiatives, and not only of simple, soft, strategic regulatory thinkings in EU circles. So thank you for these very interesting presentation and lively exchanges. I'm here this morning to shortly present indeed the climate governance initiative, which has been launched and developed in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, and which is actually implemented at national level through various chapters in different countries called Chapter 0 and then the name of the country. The aim of that initiative is to enable the non-executive directors to build their understanding of climate change, and so that they may play proactive roles in their boardroom while shaping the company's climate transition strategies. And in practice, it means organizing trainings and networking activities for non-executive directors. So today there are a number of chapters created everywhere in the world, in France, in Italy, in the UK, in Switzerland, in Singapore, in Canada, and a number of others will be shortly created, like in Germany, in the Netherlands, in the US, etc. And in Brussels, we are actually launching shortly a chapter called Chapter 0 Brussels, with the aim of at least having 3 specific objectives. The first one is to ensure that here in Belgium and in Luxembourg, as well as in the EU in general, boardrooms understand well the EU targets of net zero emissions, which is the target for 2050, and their implication on the businesses of these different companies. Secondly, it's also with the aim of driving awareness of the climate governance initiatives by key officials at the EU institutions. And thirdly, to act as a sort of incubator for the countries where actually we don't have a chapter yet. So in other words, we would be like a useful and effective bridge between the EU boardrooms and the EU institutions in order for implementing the zero emission strategy. And all of this, of course, in full collaboration with ecoDa. ecoDa is a much broader organization, and the scope of ecoDa is much broader than our initiative. And we will be formally launching our initiative on the 2nd of March by setting up a webinar at the end of the day at 5:30 p.m. Brussels time. And we have already quite interesting speakers confirmed, starting with the Commissioner Didier Reynders, who accepted to be our guest. Can you hear me? Because I see that Sandra, yeah, okay. Didier Reynders accepted to join us. He is in charge of corporate governance, and so he's well aware of the various issues related to to climate governance. Sorry, we have also, as confirmed, speaker Jean-Marc Jancovici, one of the experts on climate issues and a well-respected expert and the president of the SHIFT project in Paris. We have also Jaap Winter, who is a professor on corporate governance at the INSEAD in various universities, including in the Netherlands. And we have also Natasha Lippens, who is the chairwoman of a group called FINASUR, and she is also one of our core committee member at the Chapter 0 Brussels, and we are expecting the confirmation of a top EU CEO in order to have a comprehensive perspective on these issues of dealing with climate governance at the level of the board. The title of this webinar will be Climate at Board Level in Europe, a distraction or an opportunity to change the game. And of course, we will make sure that all the participants to this session and the people closely or directly or indirectly related to ecoDa will be able to receive the communication about the seminar, because we will do that in full collaboration with ecoDa. So thank you for intervening, and that was really, really useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for sharing with us what is the role of a Chapter 0, and for sharing also the very interesting program of your webinar. So I have been informed, because I could not read it, but Beatrice has seen that there is written on the board behind you, "Be happy, no choice." So I think that's very nice words to conclude the webinar with. Not only be happy, no choice, but also be sustainable, no choice, I think. Many thanks for all the panelists for having shared their insights with us. And of course, also thank you to the participants for their valuable time and great questions. And last but not least, many thanks to Beatrice and to Manon for the perfect organization. And we are looking forward to welcoming you very soon again at another ecoDa webinar. Bye-bye and take care.